The man who would one day become the most dangerous Sith Lord in the galaxy was not born on some dark world soaked in the Force. He was born in the sand, on Tatooine, raised among the Tusken Raiders, and his story starts with a father who gave up everything. Now, let us go back roughly 67 years before the Battle of Yavin, before the Clone Wars, before the Empire, before any of the events most fans know about. Because the rise of the one Sith did not start with a Sith Lord. It started with a Jedi. Sharad Het was one of the most famous Jedi Knights in the entire Old Republic. And we are not talking about someone who just went on a few missions and called it a career. This man had earned titles that were known across the galaxy. The Defender of Camparas, Champion of Kurmar, the Hound of Worlds, Nemesis of the Kim. Every single one of those names came from a different campaign, a different fight, a different victory that added to his reputation. Sharad Het was the kind of Jedi that other Jedi talked about. But behind all of that fame, behind every title and every victory, Sharad Het was carrying something that nobody in the Order fully understood. An attack by off-world rivals had completely destroyed his homeworld. Every major city was leveled. Millions of people were gone, and every single member of Sharad's family was taken from him in that attack. All of them. There was nothing left for him to go back to. The place he came from no longer existed in any meaningful way. That kind of loss changes a person at the deepest level. And for Sharad Het, it broke something inside him that the Jedi Order could not fix. He walked away from the Order. He left behind his rank, his reputation, everything he had built across years of service. He just disappeared, and the next time anyone saw him, he was on Tatooine. He had crash-landed on the desert planet and done something nobody expected. He had joined the Tusken Raiders. Now this was not some temporary arrangement. Sharad did not just hide among the Tuskens for a while and move on. He fully integrated into their culture. He learned their ways. He earned their respect. And over time, he became a feared warlord among the tribes. He taught the Tuskens new combat techniques. He brought them together in ways they had never been organized before. Multiple tribes fell in line under his leadership, and for the first time, the scattered Tusken clans had a real unified force in the Dune Sea. During this time, Sharad took a wife. Her name was Kashyyyk, and she was a human woman who had been taken as a child and raised within the Tusken culture her entire life. She was a warrior in her own right, and together, Sharad and Kashyyyk had a son. They named him Sharad Het, and from the moment that boy was old enough to understand the world around him, Sharad began training him in the ways of the Force, right there in the desert, right there in the sand dunes of Tatooine. This child was learning to feel the Force before he ever set foot in a Jedi temple. Now the Jedi Council back on Coruscant had no idea any of this was happening. Sharad had been gone for years, and they had given up trying to find him. But then something showed up that changed everything. Footage surfaced of what appeared to be a Tusken Raider wielding a lightsaber, and the Council took that very seriously. They sent Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi to Tatooine to investigate, and when Ki-Adi-Mundi arrived, he found exactly what the footage had suggested. Sharad Het was alive. He was living among the Tuskens, and he had a young son who was being trained in the Force. But Ki-Adi-Mundi had walked into a war zone. A conflict had erupted between the Tusken tribes and the Hutts. Jabba the Hutt and Gardula the Elder had both moved against the Tuskens, and the situation was deteriorating fast. The desert was turning into a battlefield, and in the middle of all that chaos, a bounty hunter named Aurra Sing showed up. Aurra Sing was one of the most notorious figures in the galaxy at that time. She was a Jedi hunter. She had made a name for herself by going after Force users, and she was extremely good at what she did. Aurra Sing ambushed Sharad Het and drove her lightsaber straight through his chest. The greatest Tusken warlord Tatooine had ever seen was struck down in the middle of a war he had been fighting to protect his people. And as Sharad lay there in his final moments, he turned to Ki-Adi-Mundi and made him promise one thing. Take my son to Coruscant. Train him as a Jedi. That was the last thing Sharad Het ever asked for, and Ki-Adi-Mundi gave him his word. What happened next only made things worse. Kashyyyk, the boy's mother, was caught in a sandstorm shortly after and was never seen again. She was presumed gone. The Tusken coalition that Sharad had spent years building was wiped out by the Hutts. Everything the family had created in the desert was torn apart in a matter of days. Sharad Het was left with nothing. No father, no mother, no home, no tribe. He was roughly 15 years old. Ki-Adi-Mundi kept his promise. He brought Sharad to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. And this happened around the same period that another young boy from Tatooine was entering the Order, Anakin Skywalker. Two desert boys arriving at the Jedi Temple at nearly the same time from the same planet, carrying very different kinds of pain. And their paths would cross in ways that neither of them could have predicted. When Sharad walked into the temple, he did something that immediately set him apart from every other Padawan in the building. He kept his Tusken head wrappings on. He refused to remove them. In a place where conformity was expected, where students dressed alike and followed the same routines, Sharad wore the face coverings of his people as a statement. This was who he was. He was a Jedi now, but he was also a son of the sand, and he was not going to let anyone forget that. He was one of the only Jedi to ever wear traditional Tusken wrappings inside the temple walls. His initial training began under Ki-Adi-Mundi, the same Jedi master who had brought him to Coruscant. But as time went on, Sharad was eventually placed under the guidance of a very different kind of teacher. Her name was Anya Kuro, though most people in the Order knew her as the Dark Woman. She was mysterious. She was unconventional. She did not teach the way other Jedi Masters taught, and she saw something in Sharad that others either missed or chose to ignore, because the darkness was already there. Even as a young Padawan, it showed itself. During one mission, Sharad came face to face with Aurra Sing, the same bounty hunter who had taken his father from him. And in that moment, everything Sharad had been taught about peace and control and letting go of attachment went out the window. He fought Aurra Sing with everything he had, and during that fight, he reached deep into the dark side of the Force. The anger that had been sitting inside him since the day his father fell came pouring out, and he nearly lost himself completely to the rage. He managed to take Aurra Sing down, but the way he did it shook him to his core. The guilt of what he had almost become stayed with him long after the fight was over. The Dark Woman understood what was happening inside her student. She could see the path that Sharad was being pulled toward, and she knew that running from it would only make things worse. She convinced him that exile would not solve his problems, that he could not escape what was inside him by going somewhere else. Instead, she took him under her wing, and began teaching him something that most Jedi struggled with their entire lives: how to accept loss without letting it turn into anger. How to face the reality of the people you have lost without letting that grief become a weapon that destroys you. And for a time, it seemed like those lessons were working. Asharad Het grew into a capable Padawan. He trained hard. He followed the path of the Jedi as best he could, but the truth was sitting right beneath the surface. Some of the Jedi around him could feel it. There was a shadow clinging to Asharad Het, something dark and patient that never fully went away no matter how much training he put in. It was the kind of darkness that does not announce itself. It does not show up all at once. It waits. It grows slowly. And it would take nearly 2 centuries for that shadow to fully reveal what it had been building toward the entire time. Asharad Het had entered the Jedi Order carrying the weight of everything he had lost. A legendary father struck down in front of him. A mother swallowed by the desert. A people scattered and destroyed. And a moment of rage that proved the dark side already had a foothold inside him. He was a Jedi, but the sand never left his bones. And the galaxy had no idea what this boy from Tatooine would eventually become. There is a moment during the Clone Wars that almost nobody talks about. A moment where one conversation between 2 Jedi on a battlefield could have changed the entire future of the galaxy. And the reason it matters so much is because one of those Jedi was Asharad Het, and the other was Anakin Skywalker. When the Clone Wars broke out across the galaxy in 22 BBY, Asharad Het did not hesitate. He stepped into the role of Jedi General in the Grand Army of the Republic and threw himself into the fighting from day one. And he was good at it. Really good. He was the kind of leader who did not sit in a command center giving orders from a safe distance. He was on the ground with his troops, in the thick of every engagement, leading charges and putting himself in the same danger as the soldiers around him. That kind of leadership earned him loyalty fast, and it earned him a reputation as one of the more capable Jedi commanders in the war. His first major engagement was at the Battle of Geonosis, the very battle that kicked off the entire Clone Wars. Asharad flew his Jedi starfighter in air support over the arena and the surrounding plains, while clone troopers fought separatist droid armies below. From there, his war only got bigger. He fought ground campaigns on worlds like Metalorn and Argonar, each one more brutal than the last, each one pushing him further into a conflict that was consuming the entire galaxy system by system. Now here is where Asharad's story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. After the Battle of Jabiim, the Jedi Order received word that Obi-Wan Kenobi had been lost in the fighting. Kenobi was presumed gone, and for a young Jedi named Anakin Skywalker, that news was devastating. Obi-Wan had been more than just a teacher to Anakin. He was the closest thing to family that Anakin had inside the Order. Losing him left a gap that Anakin did not know how to fill. Asharad stepped into that gap. The two of them became close during this period of the war, bonding over shared experiences and the weight of everything they were carrying. Both of them were from Tatooine. Both of them had lost people they loved, and both of them were fighting a war that seemed to have no end in sight. For Asharad, the connection felt natural. He saw a younger version of himself in Anakin. Someone talented, someone driven, someone who carried pain beneath the surface. Then came Argonar. Asharad and Anakin were deployed together on the planet, and their gunship took heavy fire. It went down behind enemy lines, leaving the two of them stranded in hostile territory with no backup and no way out. They had to survive on their own. And during that time together, isolated from the rest of the army, A'Sharad tried to deepen their bond. He told Anakin that he would have made a good Tusken. In A'Sharad's mind, this was one of the highest compliments he could give someone. The Tuskens were his people. Saying that Anakin would have fit among them was his way of expressing genuine respect and admiration. Anakin did not take it that way, at all. What A'Sharad had no way of knowing was that Anakin Skywalker carried a deep and burning hatred for the Tusken Raiders. The same Tusken people that A'Sharad loved and identified with were the people who had taken Anakin's mother, Shmi Skywalker. They had captured her, they had held her, and by the time Anakin found her, she was already gone. She passed in his arms. What Anakin did after that moment was something he had never told anyone in the Jedi Order. But stranded on Argonar, alone with a man who considered the Tuskens his family, Anakin's secret came out. He told A'Sharad the truth. He confessed that after finding his mother, he had gone back to the Tusken camp and wiped out the entire tribe. Men, women, and children. He had let the rage take over completely, and he had not stopped until there was no one left standing. Think about what that confession meant for A'Sharad Het. Here was a man who had been raised by the Tuskens, who considered them his people, who wore their wrappings as a badge of honor inside the Jedi Temple itself. And now he was hearing that the young Jedi standing next to him, the person he had been building a friendship with, had destroyed an entire village of the people he loved. The Tusken part of A'Sharad understood rage. He understood what grief could do to a person when it went unchecked. He had felt that same pull during his fight with Aurra Sing years earlier. But the Jedi part of him recognized what Anakin had done for exactly what it was, a deeply dark act, the kind of act that the Jedi teachings existed to prevent, the kind of darkness that should have been reported to the Council immediately. A'Sharad made a choice, and it might be the single most consequential decision in this entire story. He kept Anakin's secret. He did not report what he had heard to the Jedi Council. He did not raise the alarm about the darkness living inside one of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy. He believed that Anakin had to face this on his own terms, that it was Anakin's burden to carry, and that the young man needed to find his own way back to the light. That silence would follow A'Sharad Het for the rest of his life. Decades later, after everything fell apart, after the Jedi Order was destroyed and the galaxy burned under the Empire, A'Sharad would look back at that moment on Argonar and ask himself the one question that never stopped haunting him. What if he had spoken up? What if he had told the Council about Anakin's darkness? Would the Jedi have intervened? Could the fall of the entire Order have been prevented if one person had just said something when it mattered? The war continued. A'Sharad fought on campaign after campaign, moving from one battlefield to the next as the Clone Wars ground forward. At the Battle of Bos Pitti, he watched his mentor Adi Gallia fall at the hands of General Grievous. Another loss, another person taken from him by the war. The list of people A'Sharad cared about was getting shorter with every engagement. And the emotional toll was building in ways that nobody around him fully recognized. On the planet Saleucami, something unexpected happened. A'Sharad fell in love. Her name was Shan Amersu, and she was a fellow Jedi fighting in the same campaign. For A'Sharad, who had spent his entire life defined by loss and duty, this connection was rare. It was real. and it did not last. Xi'an sacrificed herself during the battle, choosing to destroy the Separatists' planetary gun, even though it meant she would not walk away from it. She gave her life to save the people around her, and Asherod was left standing on the other side of that decision, with one more name added to the list of people the galaxy had taken from him. He fought at the Siege of Saleucami alongside Jedi like Kakrok and Quinlan Vos, two warriors whose own paths through the Clone Wars were long and painful in their own right. Kakrok, in particular, would end up crossing Asherod's story again, much later, in ways that neither of them could have imagined at the time. By the final stretch of the Clone Wars, Asherod Het had earned the rank of Jedi Master. He was battle-tested in a way that few Jedi in the Order could match. He had survived Geonosis, Argonar, Boz Pitti, Saleucami, and dozens of engagements in between. He carried 2 green lightsabers into every fight, wielding them in the Jarkai dual blade style. One of those sabers was his own. The other had belonged to his father, Sharad Het. Every time Asherod ignited that second blade, he was carrying his father's memory into the fight alongside him. He was respected. He was trusted. He was one of the survivors. But the war had done something to him that promotion and recognition could not undo. And the biggest mark of all was the secret he was still carrying. The truth about Anakin Skywalker that he had never shared with anyone. The Clone Wars were almost over. The galaxy was about to change in ways that nobody in the Jedi Order was prepared for. And Asherod Het, Jedi Master, Son of the Sand, was about to walk straight into the worst day in the history of the Jedi. Order 66 came for every Jedi in the galaxy at the same time, and Asherod Het was alone when it found him. He was out on a scouting mission, separated from his clone troopers, when he felt it. A disturbance in the Force so massive and so sudden that there was no mistaking what it meant. Across the galaxy, Jedi were falling. He could feel them going dark one by one, their presences in the Force flickering out like candles being snuffed in a windstorm. The clones that had fought beside every Jedi general for the past 3 years had received a single command from Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, who had been the Sith Lord Darth Sidious the entire time, hiding in plain sight at the center of the Republic. And that command turned every clone trooper in the galaxy into an executioner. The clones assigned to Asherod came for him too. They turned their blasters on the man they had been serving under and opened fire. But Asherod Het was not an easy target. He was a Jedi Master who had survived some of the worst campaigns of the Clone Wars. He had been fighting non-stop for 3 years, and when those clones pointed their weapons at him, he cut through every single one of them. He left one trooper alive just long enough to get answers, long enough to learn what had happened, that the Republic was gone, that the Jedi were being hunted, that the entire galaxy had shifted underneath him in the span of a few hours. With that information, and believing he might be the last Jedi still breathing, Asherod Het did the only thing that made sense to him. He ran. And the place he ran to was the same place where his story had started decades earlier. Tatooine, the desert, the sand, the only home that had never asked him to be anything other than what he already was. He put the Tusken wrappings back on, the same coverings he had worn as a boy. the same ones he had refused to remove when he first walked into the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. After everything the galaxy had put him through, after the Clone Wars, after watching the Jedi Order get ripped apart in a single afternoon, Asharad went back to being a Tusken. He rejoined the tribes, and within a short time, he had risen to become a war leader over several clans. His plan was straightforward. He would build an army in the desert, keep it hidden, and when the time was right, he would use it to strike against the new galactic empire that Palpatine had built on top of the Republic's corpse. That was the plan, anyway. The reality turned out very differently, because Asharad Het was angry, and angry people do not always point their weapons in the right direction. Instead of waging war against the Empire, he turned his Tusken forces against the moisture farmers of Tatooine. These were ordinary people, settlers, families trying to make a living on a desert planet that barely gave them enough water to survive. They had moved into areas that the Tuskens considered their ancestral territory, and Asharad used that tension as justification for launching raids against their farms. One after another, homesteads across the desert came under attack from Tusken war parties led by a man who had once sworn an oath to protect the innocent. The raids kept spreading, and eventually, Asharad's campaign of aggression brought his forces right up to the edge of a small moisture farm owned by the Lars family. Just another homestead in the middle of nowhere, or so Asharad thought. What he did not know was that someone was already watching that farm. Someone was already protecting it. And when Asharad arrived at the Lars homestead, he came face to face with the last person he expected to find hiding in the Tatooine desert, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kenobi was alive. He had survived Order 66 and made his way to Tatooine, where he had been living in secret ever since. And he was there for one reason. The Lars homestead was home to an infant named Luke Skywalker, the son of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. The boy had been hidden on Tatooine to keep him safe from the Empire, and Obi-Wan had taken it upon himself to watch over the child from a distance. He could not let anything threaten that farm or the boy growing up inside it. Obi-Wan tried to talk Asharad down. He asked him to stop the raids. He tried to reason with him. He appealed to whatever was left of the Jedi inside the man standing in front of him. But he could not tell Asharad the real reason he was protecting this particular farm. He could not reveal that Anakin's son was inside. That secret was too important and too dangerous to share with anyone, especially a man who was clearly spiraling. Asharad refused to back down. In his mind, the moisture farmers had taken Tusken land, and the Tuskens had every right to take it back. Diplomacy was not going to work here. Both of them knew it. And so two Jedi survivors, two men who had fought on the same side during the Clone Wars, who had both lost everything when Order 66 came, ignited their lightsabers in the Tatooine sand. The Tusken army stood watching as their war leader fought the stranger in the desert. Sabers clashed across the flat, open ground, and the fight was intense. But Obi-Wan Kenobi had spent his career going up against some of the most dangerous opponents in the galaxy. He had fought Darth Maul. He had fought General Grievous. He had stood on a lava planet and brought down his own former apprentice. And on that day in the Tatooine sand, he was fighting to protect a child who represented the last hope for the galaxy. Kenobi won, decisively. He severed Asharad's right arm with a single clean strike, and then he did something far worse than any physical wound could have delivered. He reached forward and removed Asharad's Tusken mask. He pulled it off and exposed Asharad's bare face to the entire tribe that was standing there watching. In Tusken culture, showing your skin is one of the worst things that can happen to you. It is forbidden. The wrappings are sacred. They are your identity. To have your face exposed in front of your people is a humiliation so severe that there is no coming back from it. And on top of that, A'Sharad now had only one hand. He could never again hold the Gaddafi stick, the traditional weapon of the Tusken warriors. Without that weapon, and without his mask, A'Sharad Het was no longer a Tusken in the eyes of his people. The tribe cast him out. They turned their backs on him and walked away, leaving him alone in the sand with one arm, no mask, and nothing left to call his own. Think about where this man was now. He had already lost his Jedi identity when the Order was destroyed. And now he had lost his Tusken identity in a single afternoon. The two things that had defined A'Sharad Het since the day he was born, the two cultures he had spent his entire life trying to hold on to at the same time, were both gone. He was nobody. He belonged nowhere. Exiled from Tatooine, drifting through the galaxy with no purpose and no direction, A'Sharad eventually learned something that made everything worse. He found out what had happened to Anakin Skywalker, the young Jedi he had befriended during the Clone Wars, the man whose dark secret he had carried in silence for years had become Darth Vader. Anakin had fallen to the dark side completely. He had helped Palpatine destroy the Jedi Order. He had become the enforcer of the Galactic Empire, the armored fist that kept the galaxy in line through fear. A'Sharad Het picked up work as a bounty hunter. He wandered the galaxy, taking jobs, using his Force abilities to stay alive while keeping his Jedi past hidden from everyone around him. He was surviving, but that was all he was doing. There was no mission, there was no purpose, there was no reason to keep going other than the simple fact that he had not stopped yet. He was a ghost walking through a galaxy that had already moved on without him, carrying a weight that only got heavier with every passing year. And somewhere inside that broken, purposeless shell of a man, the dark side was still waiting. Korriban was not the kind of planet anyone stumbled onto by accident. It was the ancient homeworld of the Sith, a world where the dark side of the Force was not just present, but soaked into every grain of dirt and every stone. The tombs of Sith Lords who had been gone for thousands of years still radiated with their power. The air itself felt wrong. And it was here, during a routine bounty hunting job, that A'Sharad Het walked into the place that would swallow what was left of him whole. He had been drifting for a while at this point, taking jobs, staying anonymous, moving from system to system with no real direction and no reason to stop. The galaxy did not know he existed, and he was fine keeping it that way. But Korriban had a pull to it that went beyond anything physical. The dark side energy on that planet reached out to Force-sensitive beings like a hand extended in the dark. And A'Sharad, whether he realized it or not, had been walking toward that hand for a long time. Deep inside the crypts and burial chambers that dotted Korriban's surface, A'Sharad found something that would redirect the rest of his life. A Sith holocron. And this was not just any holocron. It belonged to Lady Zosan. For anyone unfamiliar, Zosan was one of the original Dark Jedi exiles who had left the Jedi Order thousands and thousands of years before the Clone Wars. She and the other exiles had traveled to Korriban, found the Sith species already living there, and essentially built the Sith Order from the ground up. She was a founder, one of the very first. Her holocron contained knowledge that stretched back to the earliest days of the dark side as an organized tradition. When Asharad activated the holocron, Zosan's spirit spoke to him, not a recording, not a pre-recorded message. The holocron projected a version of Zosan's consciousness that could teach, respond, and guide. And she began doing exactly that. She taught Asharad the philosophies of the Sith. She showed him techniques that the Jedi had never known. She opened the door to an entire world of dark side knowledge that had been accumulating for millennia, just sitting there in the tombs of Korriban, waiting for someone to come along and pick it up. And here is the part that makes Asharad's story so painful. He did not go looking for Sith knowledge because he wanted to become a Sith. That was not his motivation, at least not at the beginning. In his mind, he was learning these powers for a very specific reason. He wanted revenge. Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine had destroyed the Jedi Order. They had taken everything from him, and Asharad believed that if he could learn the secrets of the dark side, he could use those same powers against the people who had weaponized them. Fight fire with fire. Take the Sith's own tools and turn them on the two Sith Lords who had ruined the galaxy. There is a twisted logic to that. You can almost understand where his head was at. He was a man with no home, no identity, and no allies, who had just spent years wandering the galaxy as a nameless bounty hunter. The idea that he could arm himself with forbidden knowledge and use it to bring down the Empire gave him something he had not felt in a very long time: purpose. But the dark side does not work that way. It never has. Nobody picks up the dark side of the Force and uses it on their own terms without paying the price. The dark side is patient. It does not need to overpower you in a single moment. It does not need some dramatic scene where a person falls to their knees and pledges themselves to evil. It just needs time. And it needs you to keep reaching for it, one choice at a time, one lesson at a time, one day at a time, until the line between using the dark side and belonging to it disappears completely. Asharad spent years on Korriban, possibly decades. The exact timeline is hard to pin down because time moved strangely for him during this period. He was deep in study, absorbing everything Zosan's holocron had to offer, and he had also begun experimenting with Force stasis. This was a technique that allowed him to place himself in a state of suspended animation, slowing down his aging and preserving his body while his mind continued to absorb the dark side teachings around him. Between the stasis sessions and the endless hours of training, Asharad lost track of the galaxy outside those tombs. He was in his own world now, a world made of ancient secrets and dark side energy, with no one to talk to except the ghost of a Sith Lord who had been waiting in the dark for thousands of years. When he finally came out of it, when he finally emerged from Korriban and reconnected with the wider galaxy, he received news that tore the last piece of his plan apart. Palpatine was already gone. Vader was already gone. The Rebel Alliance had won the Galactic Civil War. The Empire had collapsed. Everything Asharad had been training for was pointed at a target that no longer existed. And the person responsible for all of it was the one detail that made the whole thing sting the most: Luke Skywalker, the baby that Obi-Wan Kenobi had been guarding on that moisture farm. The infant whose existence had cost Asharad his arm and his Tusken identity. That child had grown up, joined the rebellion, confronted Darth Vader, and somehow managed to redeem his father in the final moments of the war. Anakin Skywalker, the man whose darkness Asharad had kept secret all those years ago, had been brought back to the light by his own son. Palpatine was destroyed. The Empire fell, and the galaxy moved forward without Asharad Het playing any part in it at all. He turned his ship toward the unknown regions, the uncharted space beyond the edge of the galaxy, where the map stopped and the hyperspace lanes ended. Nobody went out there unless they were running from something or searching for something they could not find anywhere else. Asharad was doing both. What he found in those dark reaches of space would finish the job that Korriban had started. Something was waiting out there in the unknown. Something that would take the broken remains of Asharad Het and reshape them into something the galaxy had never seen before. The man who walked into the unknown regions was a lost Jedi pretending to be a Sith. The thing that would eventually walk out would call itself Darth Krayt, and the galaxy was nowhere near ready for what that name would come to mean. Somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, in the empty stretches of space where no Republic ship had ever traveled and no Imperial patrol had ever reached, Asharad Het's vessel was intercepted by something that should not have existed. A living ship. Not a ship with living things inside it. The ship itself was alive. Organic. Grown. Not built. It grabbed him and pulled him in before he had any chance to fight back. And just like that, the man who had survived Order 66 survived a duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi and survived years of isolation on Korriban, became a prisoner of the Yuuzhan Vong. Most people in the Star Wars galaxy had never heard of the Yuuzhan Vong at this point in history. They would not learn about them for years to come, and when they finally did, it would be during one of the most devastating invasions the galaxy had ever experienced. The Vong were an extragalactic species. They came from outside the galaxy entirely, and everything about them was different from anything the galaxy had ever encountered. Their entire civilization ran on organic biotechnology. They did not build machines. They grew them. Their ships, their weapons, their armor, even their tools were living organisms that had been shaped and engineered by specialists called Shapers. And the thing that made the Yuuzhan Vong truly terrifying to any Force user was a single fact that defied everything the Jedi and Sith had ever understood about the universe. The Vong existed outside the Force. They could not be sensed through it. They could not be manipulated by it. The Force, the energy field that connected every living thing in the galaxy, did not touch them. For someone like Asharad, who had spent his entire life relying on the Force to fight, to sense danger, to survive, this was like having a wall dropped between him and his most basic instincts. The Vong locked Asharad into a device called the Embrace of Pain, and the name was not a metaphor. It was an organic restraint system, something like a rack made of living tissue, designed to do one thing and do it perfectly. It read the nerve impulses of whoever was strapped into it. It measured how much agony the body was experiencing at any given second. And it adjusted. If the captive stopped struggling, the device increased the intensity. If the captive fought back, it tightened and twisted harder. There was no position that offered relief. There was no way to trick the system. The Embrace of Pain kept its victim at the absolute peak of suffering at all times, and it could maintain that state indefinitely. Asharad hung in that device while the Shapers went to work on him. They removed his cybernetic arm, the replacement he had been using since Obi-Wan severed the original on Tatooine, and they grafted a new one onto him. This arm was made of living Yuuzhan Vong tissue, organic material that fused directly with his body. They also took his left eye and replaced it with the eye of a Vong creature, embedding it into his skull as if he were one of their own experiments. But the changes did not stop with those procedures. The Vong implants that had been placed inside Asharad began to grow. Bony, coral-like material started spreading across his body from the points where the organic grafts had been attached. It was an exoskeleton forming on the outside of his skin, slowly expanding, slowly consuming more and more of him. This was not armor he could take off. It was becoming part of him, and it would never stop growing. This living shell would eventually define the way Darth Krayt looked for the rest of his existence. The terrifying figure covered in bone and coral that fans of the Legacy comics recognize was not a costume or a suit. It was a parasite that started here, on a Yuuzhan Vong scout ship in the space between galaxies. While all of this was happening, Asharad discovered that he was not the only prisoner on the ship. There was someone else, a former Jedi named Vergere. And Vergere's story was complicated in ways that would take an entire video on its own to fully explain. She was a Jedi from before the Clone Wars who had encountered the Yuuzhan Vong years earlier and had gone with them voluntarily. She had lived among them, studied them, learned their ways. Her loyalties were a tangled web that nobody fully understood, partly because Vergere herself seemed to operate on a level that did not fit neatly into light side or dark side categories. She had received training from Darth Sidious at one point in her past, and she walked a gray path between the Jedi and the Sith that made her one of the most unpredictable figures in the galaxy. Vergere saw Asharad hanging in the embrace of pain, and she taught him something that no Jedi would have ever approved of. She showed him how to take everything he was feeling and channel it directly into the dark side of the Force. Pain became fuel. Torment became power. Instead of trying to endure the embrace by shutting the pain out, Asharad learned to open himself up to it completely and let the dark side rush in through the cracks that the suffering had created. And it was during this period, suspended in agony on an alien ship with the dark side flooding through every part of him, that Asharad received a vision. He saw something that had never existed before, a new kind of Sith Order. Not two Sith hiding in the shadows the way Darth Bane had designed it 1,000 years earlier. Something far bigger. An entire army of Sith, unified under a single will, serving one purpose, working toward one goal. A galaxy brought to order not by two scheming lords passing power back and forth, but by a disciplined force of dark side warriors, all pointed in the same direction. Asharad shared this vision with Vergere, and the two of them argued about it. Vergere did not agree. She believed in the rule of two. She thought the Sith should remain small, focused, with a single master passing their knowledge to a single apprentice. One line of succession, one tradition carried forward generation by generation. Asharad thought that model was weak. He thought it was the reason the Sith kept failing. Two people hiding in the dark, scheming against each other, hoping that their apprentice would carry the torch after they were gone. It was fragile. It was limited. And Asharad believed the galaxy needed something stronger. They could not agree. And eventually, Vergere made her decision. She looked at Asharad Het and concluded that he was a lost cause. She abandoned him. She left him hanging in the embrace of pain and walked away from the Vong ship to pursue her own agenda. She had her own plans for the galaxy's future, and those plans would eventually lead her to a young man named Jacen Solo, the grandson of Anakin Skywalker, who she would begin grooming down a path that ended with him becoming the Sith Lord Darth Krayt. Asharad was alone again, strapped into a torture device on an alien ship with no allies and no way out. But he did not break. He kept drawing on the dark side. He kept channeling every moment of pain into raw power. And he waited. He waited until the force inside him had built to a level that the Vong and their force-blind biology could never have anticipated. Then he struck. He unleashed Force lightning for the first time in his life, a power he had never used before that moment, and he tore through his captors with it. He fought his way to one of their organic starfighters, a vessel called a Yoriket, and he escaped the ship. But before he left, he made sure there would be no witnesses. He turned around and destroyed the entire Vong scout ship. Everyone on board was gone. Nobody would know that Asharad Het had been captured. Nobody would know he had escaped. And nobody would know that the Yuuzhan Vong were out there, preparing for an invasion that would eventually cost the galaxy trillions of lives and reshape entire civilizations. Asharad could have warned someone. He could have sent a message to the New Republic. He could have told them what was coming. The information he carried in his head about the Yuuzhan Vong, their technology, their capabilities, their intentions, could have given the galaxy years of preparation time. Billions of lives might have been saved. But he chose silence. Again. The same choice he had made on Argonar when Anakin told him about the Tusken village. The same instinct to keep quiet, to protect himself, to let someone else deal with the consequences. He flew back to Korriban, back to the Sith tombs, back to Zosan's holocron, and the dark side energy that saturated every corner of that world. But the person who landed on Korriban this time was fundamentally different from the man who had left it. Asharad Het was gone. The Jedi was gone. The Tusken was gone. The bounty hunter was gone. What walked back into those tombs was something new. Something that had been forged in pain and reshaped by a vision of galactic conquest. He named himself after the most feared predator on the planet where he had been born, the Krayt dragon of Tatooine, a creature that ruled the desert through sheer dominance and that nothing in the sand could challenge. From this moment forward, the galaxy would come to know him as Darth Krayt, and the Sith Order he had seen in his vision was about to become real. For 1,000 years, the Sith had followed one rule above all others, only two, a master and an apprentice, never more. Darth Bane had created that system after watching the old Sith tear themselves apart through constant infighting, and it had worked. The rule of two had carried the Sith from the shadows of defeat all the way to Palpatine's throne. It was the most successful framework the dark side had ever produced, and Darth Krayt looked at it and said no. He threw the whole thing out. On Korriban, surrounded by the tombs of the very Sith Lords whose legacy he was about to dismantle, Krayt introduced something completely new. He called it the Rule of One, and the name was deliberately misleading because the One did not refer to a single person. It referred to the Sith Order as a whole, one body, one collective purpose, one unified organization serving under the absolute authority of a single Dark Lord. This was a radical shift in everything the Sith had been for the past millennium. Under Bane's system, the entire Sith tradition rested on two individuals at any given time. If one of them made a mistake, the whole thing collapsed. If the apprentice was weak, the lineage suffered. If the master grew complacent, the apprentice was supposed to strike them down and start the cycle over. It was a system built on distrust and designed around the idea that only through constant pressure could the Sith remain strong. Krayt saw it differently. He saw two people hiding in the dark, always looking over their shoulders, always scheming against each other, and he asked a simple question. What is the point of having power if it never actually accomplishes anything? Two Sith in a galaxy of trillions. Two individuals trying to reshape civilization from the shadows. Krayt thought that was absurd. He wanted an army, so he built one. The one Sith operated under a structure that would have been unrecognizable to any Sith who had come before. There was one Dark Lord at the top. Beneath that Dark Lord sat multiple Sith Lords, Sith Masters, and Acolytes, all organized into a hierarchy that functioned more like a military than a secret society. Blind obedience was the foundation. Absolute loyalty to the Dark Lord was the price of membership. And unlike the old Sith empires where backstabbing and betrayal were practically encouraged, the one Sith treated disloyalty as the worst possible offense. You served the Order. You served the Dark Lord. That was it. Now there was one tradition from the old ways that Krayt kept. Sith Masters still trained individual apprentices. The relationship between teacher and student still existed. But when an apprentice's training was finished, they had to do something that sounds familiar on the surface but was actually completely different in its meaning. The apprentice had to strike down their master. Under the rule of two, that act was about seizing power. The apprentice took out the master because they believed they were stronger and they wanted the top spot. Under Krayt's system, the purpose was entirely different. Striking down your master was a final test of loyalty to the Dark Lord. It proved that your allegiance was not to your teacher, not to your personal ambition, but to the Order and to Krayt himself. The act looked the same from the outside. The meaning behind it was the opposite. Krayt was so confident in his new vision that he confronted the ghosts of the old Sith directly. He accessed holocrons on Korriban that contained the preserved consciousness of Darth Bane, the architect of the Rule of Two, and he told Bane exactly what he had done. He explained that he had rebuilt the Sith, that instead of two, there was now only one, the Sith Order itself. He told Bane that he had given the Sith something they had been missing for 1,000 years. Purpose. Bane's response was cold. The ghost of the ancient Sith Lord warned Krayt that power exists for its own sake and that sharing it only makes it weaker. He called Krayt a pretender and told him flatly that his order would eventually turn on itself and on him. Bane was not the only one who felt that way. The holocrons of Darth Nihilus and Darth Andedu, two other ancient Sith whose preserved essences still lingered on Korriban, both rejected Krayt's vision as well. They considered the one Sith to be heretics, pretenders playing at a game they did not understand. Krayt listened to all of them and ignored every word. The order he was building looked nothing like anything the Sith had ever fielded before. His followers were organized down to every detail. Acolytes were not recruited as adults or discovered by chance the way most Force users found their way to the dark side. They were raised from birth on Korriban, trained from the moment they could walk, taught to believe in the one Sith with the kind of devotion that left no room for independent thought or personal ambition. These were not individuals who had chosen the dark side. They were shaped into it before they ever had the chance to choose anything else. The one Sith had a look to them that set them apart from every Sith tradition that had come before. Red and black tattoos covered their bodies in elaborate patterns. Their lightsabers were built with hilts styled after Yorick coral, the organic material used by the Yuuzhan Vong. That design choice was not decorative. It was a direct reflection of the experience that had created Darth Krayt in the first place. The Vong had broken him and remade him in their image, and now his Sith carried a piece of that transformation with them into every fight. While Krayt was building this army underneath the surface of Korriban, the rest of the galaxy kept moving. The Yuuzhan Vong invaded, and the war that followed was one of the most devastating conflicts in galactic history. The New Republic eventually won, reorganizing itself into the Galactic Alliance. Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order grew in numbers and influence. The Imperial Remnant transformed under the leadership of the Fel dynasty into a reformed galactic empire that actually cooperated with the Alliance. Decades of change swept across the galaxy, and through all of it, the one Sith sat underneath Korriban in total silence, growing, training, waiting. Krayt himself was barely holding on physically during this period. The Yuuzhan Vong implants that had been grafted onto his body during his captivity were still growing. The bony coral exoskeleton continued spreading across his body year after year, consuming more of him with every cycle. His own body was slowly being overtaken by an alien parasite, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. To survive, Krayt placed himself in extended periods of force stasis, the same technique he had first experimented with on Korriban years earlier. During these long stretches of suspended animation, his mind stayed open to only his most trusted followers. Chief among them was the Darth Wirelock line, a succession of Chagrian Sith Lords who served as Krayt's voice and regent while he slept. Each Wirelock passed the role down to the next, maintaining continuity across the decades while their master preserved what was left of his failing body. During this century of patient waiting, Krayt made one attempt to bring in outside talent. He reached out to Lumiya, a woman who had been trained by both Darth Vader and Darth Sidious. She was one of the last living connections to Bane's lineage, and Krayt wanted her in his order. Lumiya refused. Just like Verger before her, Lumiya believed in the rule of two. She had her own vision for the future of the Sith, and that vision centered on turning a young Jedi named Jacen Solo, Han and Leia's son, into her apprentice. She succeeded. Jacen became Darth Caedus, and his fall triggered the Second Galactic Civil War around 41 ABY. Krayt watched all of this from the shadows, and he let it happen. Caedus was not his project, but the chaos that Caedus created was useful. While Luke Skywalker and the Jedi Order poured everything they had into stopping Caedus, nobody was paying attention to Korriban. Nobody was looking for a hidden army of Sith growing beneath the tombs. The war was the perfect cover. When Caedus finally fell and Lumiya's Sith lineage ended with him, something significant happened that most people in the galaxy never even noticed. Darth Bane's 1,000-year legacy was effectively finished. The rule of two was over. The chain of master and apprentice that had stretched in an unbroken line from Bane all the way through Sidious and Vader and Lumiya and Caedus had finally snapped. There was no heir, no successor, no next link in that chain. The only Sith Order left standing in the galaxy was Krayt's, and nobody knew they existed. In 44 ABY, Luke Skywalker himself visited Korriban. His son Ben Skywalker was with him. So was a young Sith apprentice from the lost tribe named Vestara Kai. 3 powerful Force users walked across the surface of the planet where hundreds of one Sith were hiding directly beneath their feet, and none of them sensed a thing. The dark side energy that saturated Korriban, the same ancient miasma that poured out of every tomb and every crypt, masked the presence of Krayt's followers completely. They were invisible. Right there, in plain sight, an entire Sith army was waiting for its moment, and that moment was getting closer with every passing year. A Jedi Knight named Yakil Savetu spotted a stranger on Coruscant during one of the most chaotic periods in the capital's history. She confronted him. She was doing her job, and the stranger disarmed her without breaking stride. He did not attack her. He did not threaten her. He removed her weapon from the equation and kept walking. The only thing he said to her was that the Jedi should focus on Abeloth first. Then he moved on. That stranger was Darth Krayt, and the fact that he was walking openly through the streets of Coruscant after spending over a century hidden beneath Korriban tells you exactly how serious the situation had become. Krayt had not left his tomb because he wanted to. He left because something had appeared in the galaxy that threatened everything he had spent 100 years building. Her name was Abeloth, and she was unlike any enemy the Sith or the Jedi had ever faced. Abeloth was not a person. She was not a Sith Lord or a dark Jedi or some warlord with a fleet. She was a dark side entity on a scale that made even the most powerful Force users in galactic history look small by comparison. Her origins went back over 100,000 years, long before the Republic, long before the Jedi Order had a name. Abeloth had once been mortal. She was the servant of the Ones, the Force entities known as the Father, the Son, and the Daughter. Fans who watched the Clone Wars might remember those 3 beings from the Mortis arc. The Father held balance. The Son embodied the dark side. The Daughter embodied the light. And the servant lived among them as a mortal woman who eventually became known as the Mother. She loved the family. They loved her. But she was aging while they stayed eternal, and the fear of being forgotten drove her to do something forbidden. She drank from the font of power and bathed in the pool of knowledge, 2 ancient Force sources that no mortal was ever supposed to touch. The transformation did not make her a god. It made her a monster. She became Abeloth, a being of corrupted power who could consume living beings, wear their faces, split herself into multiple avatar bodies, and spread madness through the Force itself. The Ones had imprisoned Abeloth inside the Maw, a shell of black holes near Kessel, and kept her there for tens of thousands of years. But when the Ones perished on Mortis during the Clone Wars, and the physical infrastructure of the prison was destroyed during the Second Galactic Civil War decades later, Abeloth got out. She began tearing through the galaxy. She possessed people. She took on multiple forms at once. She manipulated an entire group called the Lost Tribe of Sith as pawns in her campaign. She drove Jedi Knights insane with a Force psychosis that made them believe everyone around them had been replaced by imposters. And eventually, she seized control of the galactic government itself by consuming a senator and winning an election while wearing the woman's face. Darth Krayt watched all of this from Korriban and recognized the problem immediately. Abeloth was chaos in its purest form. She did not want to conquer the galaxy. She did not want to rule it. She wanted to consume it, to bend it, to fill it with the kind of madness that made organized civilization impossible. And that was a direct threat to everything Krayt had been working toward. His entire vision for the One Sith was built on order, discipline, structure, a galaxy brought under a single will. Abeloth was the opposite of all of that. If she was not stopped, there would be no galaxy left for Krayt to claim. So he took an enormous risk. He left Korriban and traveled to Coruscant in person, knowing that every second he spent in the open increased the chance that someone would discover the One Sith. When Jedi noticed him moving through the capital, he let them believe he was a member of the Lost Tribe, just another Sith from the group that had already been causing problems across the galaxy. Grand Master Luke Skywalker sensed this mysterious Darksider and recognized that he was enormously powerful. But Luke also sensed that the stranger was not hostile toward the Jedi, at least not in this moment. Luke ordered his people to leave the stranger alone and let the situation play out. Krayt made his way into a metaphysical dimension called the Realm of Beyond Shadows. This was a plane of existence that sat outside physical reality, a place where the Force could be experienced in its raw, unfiltered state. It was accessible only through deep Force meditation, and it was where Abeloth was most dangerous. Luke Skywalker was already there, preparing to face Abeloth in what both of them knew would be the most important fight of the entire crisis. It was inside Beyond Shadows that an unexpected figure appeared. The Force ghost of Jacen Solo. The same Jacen Solo who had become Darth Krayt years earlier and whose fall to the dark side had triggered the chain of events that eventually freed Abeloth from her prison in the first place. Jacen's spirit recognized Krayt instantly. He identified him as the Dark Man, the same shadowy figure that Jacen and Luke had both seen in separate visions years before. This was the being whose appearance on something called the Throne of Balance had terrified Jacen so deeply that he turned to the dark side specifically to prevent that future from happening. The irony was staggering. Jacen had become a Sith to stop this man, and now this man was standing next to Luke, offering to help fight the very entity that Jacen's fall had set free. Krayt laid out his argument to Luke. With the Ones gone, there were no longer any designated guardians of the balance between light and dark. The old system was finished, and the only way to bring down a being as powerful as Abeloth was for a Jedi and a Sith to fight her together. They would have to step into the roles that the son and the daughter had once filled, light and dark, side by side, combining their strength against a common enemy. Luke did not fully trust Krayt. He noticed that the tattoos covering Krayt's body did not match the markings of the Lost Tribe. He knew this man was something else entirely, but the threat was too large to refuse the help, and Luke agreed to the alliance. What followed was one of the most extraordinary fights in the entire Star Wars timeline. Luke Skywalker and Darth Krayt, Jedi and Sith, fought Abeloth together at the Lake of Apparitions inside Beyond Shadows. The spirit of Luke's deceased wife, Mara Jade Skywalker, appeared during the battle and aided them. Krayt unleashed a technique called Force Drain against Abeloth, a power so potent that it actually damaged this ancient dark side entity. Abeloth fought back with everything she had. She ripped one of Krayt's hands clean off during the fight. The three of them, Luke, Krayt, and Abeloth, crashed and tumbled across the lake in a struggle that was as much metaphysical as it was physical. But in the end, it was the combination that made the difference. Jedi and Sith working together the way the daughter and the son had done throughout history whenever Abeloth had broken free. The pattern held. Light and dark, united against chaos, proved stronger than either side would have been alone. Abeloth fell, and when it was over, Krayt did something that might have been even more impressive than the fight itself. He walked away with his secret intact. Luke knew that the Dark Man was a Sith. Luke knew that his tattoos did not match the lost tribe. But Luke never discovered the existence of the one Sith. He never learned that an entire army of dark side warriors was hiding on Korriban. He never found out that the man standing next to him during that battle was a former Jedi named Asharad Het, who had fought alongside Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars. Krayt gave up nothing. He risked everything by coming out of hiding to fight Abeloth, and he returned to the shadows without leaving a single thread for the Jedi to pull on. Back on Korriban, Krayt resumed what he had been doing for the past century. Building, training, waiting. The obstacle was gone. Abeloth was finished. The galaxy had returned to a state that Krayt could work with. And after 100 years of patience, the moment he had been preparing for was finally within reach. Here is what makes Darth Krayt different from every other Sith Lord in Star Wars history. Palpatine started a war to gain power. Krayt poisoned a peace. By the early 100s ABY, more than a century after Luke Skywalker redeemed his father and brought down the Empire, the galaxy had finally reached something that resembled stability. The Galactic Alliance, which had grown out of the old New Republic, controlled most of the core systems. The Fel Empire, a reformed version of the Imperial remnant now led by the Fel dynasty, governed large portions of the outer territories. The two governments were not exactly friendly, but they coexisted. They traded. They cooperated on certain issues. And sitting between them, acting as a bridge and a peacekeeping force, was the new Jedi Order that Luke Skywalker had built from the ground up over the course of his lifetime. The galaxy was not perfect. Old wounds from the Yuuzhan Vong War still lingered beneath the surface. Entire worlds had been reduced to barren wastelands during that invasion, and millions of displaced people were still feeling the effects decades later. But the fighting was over. The galaxy was trying to heal. And then the Jedi proposed something that could actually make that healing real. They called it the Ossus Project. The idea was ambitious and, on the surface, beautiful. Jedi Master Cole Skywalker, a direct descendant of Luke, partnered with a Yuuzhan Vong shaper named Ne Rin to develop a terraforming program that would use Vong biological technology to restore the devastated worlds. The Yuuzhan Vong had destroyed these planets with their biotech during the invasion. Now that same biotech would be turned around and used to bring them back to life. The first test was run on the planet Ossus itself, and it worked. The results were stunning. Ossus, which had been barren and lifeless, returned to vibrant, thriving vegetation. The project was a genuine success, and the galaxy responded with something it had not felt in a long time: hope. Over 100 additional worlds were selected for the terraforming process. The future looked bright. Darth Krayt had been waiting for exactly this moment. Not just years, not just decades. He had been waiting for over a century, sitting in stasis beneath Korriban, keeping his army hidden, watching the galaxy through his network of followers, waiting for the right crack to appear in the right place at the right time. The Ossus Project was that crack. The plan Krayt put into motion was surgical. His apprentice Darth Maladi was the one Sith's leading expert in Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology. Maladi had studied the Vong's organic science extensively, and she knew exactly how to weaponize it. She reached out to a rogue Vong shaper named Zenok Kwa, a man who had never accepted the Yuuzhan Vong's surrender at the end of their war. Kwa believed his people had been betrayed by their own leaders when they laid down their weapons. He was angry, he was bitter, and he was willing to work with anyone who shared his resentment, even the Sith. Maladi and Kwa sabotaged the Ossus project using something called a Vong spawn virus. The virus was introduced into the terraforming process on every single world where the Vong had been working, and the results were horrifying. The lush vegetation that had been growing on these restored planets began withering and collapsing. Green, living landscapes turned into decaying wastelands almost overnight. But the vegetation was not the worst part. The inhabitants of these worlds, the people who had been living on the planets as the terraforming took hold, started developing growths on their skin. Bony, coral-like formations that looked identical to the implants that had been forced onto Yuuzhan Vong slaves during the invasion decades earlier. The same kind of growths that was slowly consuming Darth Krayt's own body. The panic spread fast. Across more than 100 worlds, the project that was supposed to represent the galaxy's recovery turned into a nightmare. And now Krayt's real genius revealed itself. Because the sabotage was only half the plan. The other half was the reaction. The Jedi investigated and immediately suspected that someone had tampered with the project. They were right, but they could not prove it. They had no evidence that pointed to the Sith, no smoking blaster, nothing concrete enough to convince the rest of the galaxy. And the truth did not matter anyway, because the galaxy had already made up its mind. The Yuuzhan Vong had always been hated. Even decades after their defeat and surrender, the resentment was still there, simmering just below the surface of every political conversation and every public debate. When the Ossus project failed, and people started developing Vong-like growths on their bodies, the galaxy did not wait for an investigation. The Vong were blamed instantly. The public narrative was simple, and it spread everywhere. The Yuuzhan Vong had used the Ossus project as a cover to restart their campaign against the galaxy. The terraforming had been a trap from the beginning. The Jedi tried to push back against this narrative. They defended the Yuuzhan Vong publicly, insisting that the evidence pointed to sabotage rather than Vong treachery. They urged the Galactic Alliance to stand behind the Vong and to look for the real source of the contamination. And this was the trap that Krayt had laid perfectly. By defending an alien species that the galaxy already despised, the Jedi made themselves look like they were on the wrong side. Public opinion turned against them. Systems that had once supported the Jedi Order began questioning their judgment and their loyalty. The Imperial Council of Moffs, the governing body of the Fel Empire, seized on the outrage. Whether they were being directly manipulated by Krayt's agents or riding the wave of anti-Vong sentiment on their own, the result was the same. The Moffs demanded retribution. They invoked an old agreement called the Treaty of Anaxes and declared that the Galactic Alliance had failed in its obligations. The Fel Empire declared war. Emperor Rowan Fel did not want this fight. He went along with the war reluctantly, pressured by his own Moffs and by the political momentum that was pushing everything toward conflict. He never fully committed to the campaign and even kept his personal guard, the Imperial Knights, out of the fighting entirely. Fel sensed that something was wrong with the whole situation, but he did not have enough power or enough information to stop the machine that was already in motion. The Sith Imperial War erupted in 127 ABY and lasted 3 years. The Galactic Alliance, which should have been strong enough to hold its ground, was fractured from the inside. Worlds that blamed the Jedi for defending the Vong withdrew their support. Political alliances that had held together for decades fell apart under the pressure of public anger and wartime paranoia. The Alliance was fighting a war against the Fel Empire while simultaneously losing the loyalty of its own member systems. And then, in the second year of the war, the One Sith revealed themselves publicly for the first time. They stepped out of the shadows and openly allied with the Fel Empire. Hundreds of tattooed Sith warriors, trained on Korriban for generations, entered the conflict on the Imperial side. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The Galactic Alliance, already divided and struggling, could not withstand the combined force of the Fel military and an entire Sith army. Within 3 years of the war's start, the Galactic Alliance surrendered. The Empire absorbed every system the Alliance had controlled. Coruscant, the capital of galactic civilization, became the Imperial throne world for the first time in over a century. Everything the New Republic and the Galactic Alliance had built since the fall of Palpatine's empire was gone. 100 years of democratic governance wiped out in 3 years of fighting that had been started by a lie. Shaper Nehrin eventually returned to Ossus with proof. Actual concrete evidence that the Sith had been behind the sabotage of the terraforming project from the very beginning. The contamination had not come from the Yuuzhan Vong. It had come from the One Sith, planted deliberately to trigger exactly the chain of events that had just played out. But the proof arrived after the war was already over, after the Alliance had already surrendered, after Coruscant had already fallen. The truth came too late to save anything. Krayt had played the entire galaxy. He had taken the one thing that was supposed to bring the galaxy together, a project built on cooperation and healing and hope for the future, and he had turned it into a weapon that tore everything apart. He did not need a fleet. He did not need a superweapon. He needed a virus, a scapegoat, and a galaxy that was still too angry about the past to think clearly about the present. And after 100 years of waiting, the board was finally set for his last move. Everything that follows happened in 130 ABY. 1 year. That is all it took for Darth Krayt to go from a hidden figure beneath Korriban to the ruler of the galaxy. A century of patience. And then he moved so fast that nobody had time to react. The Galactic Alliance had just surrendered. The war was over. The Fel Empire now controlled more territory than any government had held since Palpatine's original empire. And Emperor Rowan Fel, the man sitting on that throne, did what any ruler in his position would do after winning a war against a government that had harbored the Jedi. He called on the new Jedi Order to lay down their weapons and submit to Imperial authority. Some of them actually did. A small number of Jedi chose to cooperate with the Empire and joined a group called the Imperial Knights. The Imperial Knights were something unusual in Star Wars lore. They were a Force tradition loyal specifically to the Emperor, and they walked a deliberate middle path between the light side and the dark side. They were not Jedi. They were not Sith. They served the throne. And as long as the Emperor served the light, They served the Emperor. For the Jedi who joined them, it was a compromise, a way to keep serving the galaxy within the new political reality. But most of the Jedi Order refused, and they had good reason. By this point, the surviving Jedi leadership understood what had really happened. They knew the Sith had been behind the sabotage of the Ossus project. They knew the entire war had been manufactured. Surrendering to an empire that was now openly allied with the Sith was not something they were willing to do. So the majority of the Order pulled back from Coruscant and retreated to their academy on the planet Ossus. Krayt did not give them time to regroup. The moment the Jedi gathered on Ossus, he saw an opportunity to cripple them in a single strike. He sent his hand, a Sith Lord named Darth Nihil, to lead a full assault on the Jedi Praxium. What happened next became one of the darkest chapters in the history of the Jedi Order since Palpatine's Purge over a century and a half earlier. The Sith attacked the Academy with overwhelming numbers and ferocity. Darth Nihil personally cut through some of the most prominent Jedi at the Academy. His most significant target was Cole Skywalker, a member of the Jedi Council and a direct descendant of Luke Skywalker himself. Cole was one of the leaders who had championed the Ossus project in the first place, the man who had believed that Vong technology could heal the galaxy's wounds. He was struck down during the assault, and watching from the chaos of that battlefield was a young boy named Cade Skywalker, Cole's son, the latest in the Skywalker bloodline. Cade saw his father fall, and that image would stay with him for the rest of his life. The attack on Ossus was devastating, but it was not the clean sweep that Krayt had been hoping for. The Sith had moved before the entire Jedi Order could assemble at the Academy. More than half of the Order's surviving members were scattered across the galaxy on other assignments when the assault happened. They never made it to Ossus, and when word reached them about what had taken place, they went underground. Jedi survivors disappeared into the outer systems, into the fringes, into the forgotten corners of the galaxy where the Empire's reach was weakest. Many of them eventually found their way to a secret location called the Hidden Jedi Temple on the planet Tyvus. The Order was shattered, but it was not gone. Krayt had wounded it badly. He had not finished it off. That was a problem Krayt could deal with later, because right now, in this moment, there was a bigger target sitting in front of him, the Imperial throne. So Krayt did not wait for permission. He did not negotiate. He did not send a message or make a demand. He walked into the Imperial Palace on Coruscant with his Sith at his back, and he marched straight into Emperor Rowan Fell's audience chamber. What happened inside that room was supposed to be the final move. Krayt confronted the Emperor and struck him down personally. The man on the throne fell. The Sith had just taken the galactic seat of power by force. Except Krayt had been fooled. The man he had just struck down was not Rowan Fell. It was a body double, a decoy placed on the throne specifically because the real Rowan Fell had sensed the danger coming. Fell was a trained Force user, and his instincts had told him that the Sith were about to make their move. He had swapped himself out and fled the palace before Krayt ever set foot inside. The real Emperor was alive, free, and already planning his next steps from somewhere beyond Krayt's reach. It was the one detail that did not go according to plan. Krayt had spent 100 years building toward this moment, and at the final step, his target had slipped through his fingers. But Krayt was not the kind of person who let a setback stop the momentum. Fell was gone, but the throne was empty, and an empty throne is still a throne. Krayt sat down in it. He turned to the Moff Council, the collection of imperial governors and military leaders who had been running the Empire's day-to-day operations, and he told them how things were going to work from now on. The Moffs looked at the Sith Lord sitting where their Emperor had been just hours earlier. They looked at the army of tattooed dark side warriors standing behind him, and they did the math. There was no fleet coming to save them. There was no Emperor to rally behind. The Jedi were scattered. The Galactic Alliance had surrendered. The Moff Council bent the knee and swore their loyalty to Darth Krayt. A Sith Lord was sitting on the galactic throne. That had not happened since Palpatine. Darth Krayt had come close nearly a century earlier, but his reign had been brief and contested from the start. Krayt's claim was different. He had the military. He had the Moffs. He had an entire Sith Order standing behind him. And the only two forces that might have challenged him, the Jedi and the legitimate Emperor, were both on the run. Darth Krayt had the throne. He had the military. He had the Moff Council on its knees. But from the very first day he sat down as Emperor, the cracks were already forming, because three separate groups refused to accept what had happened, and all three of them started fighting back immediately. The first was Rowan Fel, the real Emperor, the man who had escaped the palace before Krayt's coup and disappeared into the galaxy with his life and his reputation intact. Fel did not go quietly. He gathered every loyal Moff, every military officer who still believed in the Fel dynasty, and every Imperial knight who had pledged their service to his family rather than to whoever happened to be sitting on the throne. Over time, this growing coalition captured the Outer Rim fortress world of Bastion and turned it into a staging center. Fel was building an empire in exile, and he had the military experience, the political connections, and the personal credibility to make it work. The second was Admiral Gar Stasi. When the Galactic Alliance surrendered, Stasi looked at the order to hand over the Alliance core fleet and decided he was not going to do it. At the Battle of Karmas, Stasi took his ships and ran. He kept the fleet intact, pulled it out of Imperial reach, and launched a guerrilla campaign against Krayt's navy that would last 7 years. His tactics were a direct echo of the original Rebel Alliance. Hit-and-run strikes against Imperial supply lines, quick raids on vulnerable targets, constant movement, never staying in one place long enough for the Sith to pin him down. Stasi could not match Krayt's forces in a straight fight, but he did not need to. He just needed to keep the resistance alive long enough for the political situation to change. The third group was the surviving New Jedi Order. Jedi like Wolf Sazin, Shadow Vow, and Kakruk had escaped the massacre at Ossus and gone underground. They operated from the shadows, moving carefully, connecting with other survivors and slowly rebuilding the network that Krayt had tried to destroy. They were not strong enough to challenge the Sith directly, not yet, but they were patient, and they were watching for the right moment. 3 enemies, 3 different strategies. 3 fronts that Krayt had to manage simultaneously while also running a galactic government and keeping his own Sith Order in line. The throne was his, but it was not comfortable. And then there was the problem that no amount of military power or political maneuvering could solve. Krayt was falling apart, physically. The Yuuzhan Vong implants that had been grafted onto his body decades earlier on that scout ship in the unknown regions were still growing. The bony coral exoskeleton continued spreading across his body, consuming more of him every year. He was using force stasis to slow the deterioration. He was using healing trances to manage the pain. He was pouring dark side energy into his own body just to keep functioning. But none of it was a cure. It was all just buying time. And time was running out. Then word reached Krayt about someone who changed every calculation. A young man living on the fringes of the galaxy, working as a bounty hunter and smuggler, running jobs with a small crew that included a human named Jariah Sin and a Zeltron named Delia Blue. This young man had no interest in the Jedi Order. He had no interest in the Force. He had walked away from all of it after watching his father get struck down at the massacre of Ossus, and had spent the years since doing everything he could to bury his past. His name was Cade Skywalker, son of Cole Skywalker, the latest in the bloodline that stretched all the way back to Anakin. And Cade had something that made Darth Krayt's pulse quicken the moment he heard about it. Cade possessed an extraordinary force healing ability, something instinctive, something that went beyond what normal Jedi healers could do. He could bring people back from the edge when no one else could reach them. He used a technique called dark transfer, and the raw power behind it was unlike anything the galaxy had seen from a healer before. Krayt's logic was straightforward. If this Skywalker could heal others who were beyond saving, maybe he could heal the Vong implants that were consuming the Sith Emperor from the inside out. Maybe Cade Skywalker was the answer to the one problem that had been following Krayt since his captivity. If Krayt could get his hands on Cade, he might not just survive. He might be restored. Cade was captured and brought to Coruscant. Standing in front of the Sith Emperor, the young Skywalker was subjected to a test that was as cruel as it was calculated. Darth Maladi, the same Sith who had engineered the sabotage of the Ossus project, infected several of Cade's friends with Vong coral seeds. The growths began forming on their bodies, the same parasitic process that was slowly overtaking Krayt himself. Cade was told to heal them, and he did. He reached into the Force and pulled his friends back from the brink, burning away the Vong infection through sheer willpower and raw ability. It worked. But the act of channeling that much power, of reaching that deep into the Force under those conditions, came at a cost that went beyond physical exhaustion. Every time Cade used dark transfer, it pulled him closer to the dark side. The technique worked, but it was taking pieces of him with it. After the test, Krayt did something that nobody in the room expected. He showed Cade his father's lightsaber, the weapon that had belonged to Cole Skywalker, the man who had fallen at Ossus. And then Krayt told Cade the truth about who he really was. Not just a Sith Lord, not just an Emperor. He was Asharad Het, a former Jedi Master, a veteran of the Clone Wars, a man who had known Anakin Skywalker personally, who had fought beside him on battlefields across the galaxy over 150 years earlier. Krayt was showing Cade that the line between Jedi and Sith was not as clean as anyone pretended it was. That the man sitting on this throne had once been exactly what Cade was running from. Cade was not interested. He looked at everything Krayt was offering, the power, the healing, the connection to a shared history, and he rejected all of it. He fought his way out of the Sith Temple, injuring both Darth Talon and Darth Nihil during his escape. Two of Krayt's most dangerous followers, taken down by a young man who had spent the past several years pretending he was not a Jedi. The raw power Cade displayed during that escape sent a message that echoed through the entire One Sith. The Skywalker bloodline was still a force that even the Sith Emperor could not control. While Krayt was dealing with the Cade situation, his reign took its darkest turn yet on a completely different front. Admiral Gar Stasi pulled off a daring operation at the Mon Calamari shipyards, stealing a star destroyer called the Imperius right out from under the Empire's nose. It was a humiliating loss for Krayt, the most powerful warship in the fleet, taken by a resistance force that was not even supposed to still exist. Krayt's response was extreme beyond anything the galaxy had seen since Palpatine's era. He turned his anger on the Mon Calamari people themselves. He ordered that 10% of the Mon Calamari population be rounded up and eliminated as punishment for what had happened at their shipyards. He personally oversaw the destruction of the Mon Calamari Council. An entire species was being punished for the actions of a rebel admiral who had nothing to do with their civilian government. It was one of the most terrible acts of any ruler in the entire Star Wars timeline, and it showed the galaxy exactly what kind of emperor Darth Krayt truly was. This was not a leader who tolerated defiance. This was someone who would sacrifice an entire people to make a point. The resistance kept fighting. Fel kept building his forces on Bastion. Stasi kept raiding from the shadows. The Jedi kept waiting. And somewhere out in the fringe, Cade Skywalker was running from a destiny that the entire galaxy seemed determined to drag him back into. Darth Bane had warned him. The ghost of the ancient Sith Lord, speaking through a holocron on Korriban over a century earlier, had told Krayt exactly what would happen. Your order will turn on itself and on you. Krayt had dismissed it. He had built his entire system around loyalty, around obedience, around the idea that the One Sith were different from every Sith order that had come before. And then his most trusted advisor looked down at his broken body and decided that the cause was more important than the man who built it. But we need to back up, because the events that led to that moment were a cascade of desperation, deception, and a trap that Krayt walked straight into. By 137 ABY, the walls were closing in. Rowan Fel's forces were growing stronger on Bastion. Gar Stasi's guerrilla fleet was still hitting Imperial targets across the galaxy. The Jedi were still out there, still hiding, still waiting, and Krayt's body was failing faster than ever. The Vong implants had continued their slow advance across his body, and no amount of force stasis or healing trances was going to reverse the damage. He needed a real solution, and he was running out of time to find one. That desperation is what made him vulnerable. A joint force of Jedi and Imperial Knights set a trap on the deep-core planet of Had Abaddon, and the bait they used was perfect. An ancient Sith Lord named Karnes Moore, whose spirit had survived for thousands of years by inhabiting a relic called the Moore Talisman, was currently bound to a Jedi Master named Celeste Morn. Moore reached out to Krayt through the Force and offered him the one thing he wanted more than anything else in the galaxy, a way to heal his Vong affliction. Moore claimed he had the knowledge to free Krayt from the parasitic growths that were consuming him. All Krayt had to do was come to Had Abaddon. Krayt went. He walked into the trap because the promise of healing was something he could not resist, and the ambush that was waiting for him was coordinated and brutal. The fighting on Had Abaddon was savage from the first moment. In the chaos of the battle, an Imperial Knight named Aslin Ray drove a blade through Krayt's chest. Celeste Morn, channeling the power of Karnes Moor through the talisman, hit Krayt with a blast of force lightning that sent him over the edge of a cliff. The Sith Emperor tumbled down the rock face and hit the ground at the base, his body shattered from the combination of the stab wound, the lightning, and the fall. Darth Warlock III found him, the third in the Warlock line, the latest in the succession of Chagrian Sith Lords who had served as Krayt's voice and regent for generations. Warlock had been Krayt's most trusted follower, the person closest to the throne, the one member of the one Sith who had been given more access, more responsibility, and more trust than any other. He climbed down to the base of that cliff and found Krayt's body. And against all logic, against everything the injuries should have guaranteed, Krayt was still alive. He had used the Force to cushion his fall at the last second. Broken, barely conscious, bleeding from the chest wound and the lightning burns, but alive, Krayt looked up at Warlock and told him something remarkable. He said he had learned what he needed from Karnes Moor during the fight, that the encounter with the ancient Sith spirit had given him the knowledge to finally heal himself. He asked Warlock to take him to a Bacta tank so he could begin the process. Warlock stood over his master's broken body and made a different choice. He told Krayt that sometimes for a cause to survive, the leader of that cause has to fall. Then he hit Krayt with Force lightning, his own master, the man he had served for his entire life, the Dark Lord who had built the one Sith from nothing and trusted Warlock's family line above all others. Warlock sent the charge through Krayt's already ravaged body and believed he had finished the job. He transported Krayt's body back to Korriban and placed it inside a stasis chamber within Zosan's temple. The same temple where Krayt had first discovered the holocron that started his journey into the dark side decades earlier. Then Warlock returned to Coruscant and declared himself regent of the one Sith. He told the Order that Krayt was recovering, that the Dark Lord was healing in seclusion and would return when he was ready. In reality, Warlock believed Krayt was gone for good. He intended to run the one Sith himself, continuing Krayt's policies while quietly consolidating his own power. He even expanded Krayt's plans, laying groundwork to bring the entire galaxy into the one Sith through forced induction on a scale that Krayt himself had never attempted. Bane's prophecy had come true. The Order had turned on its founder. The system built on loyalty had produced the very betrayal it was designed to prevent. Everything the ghosts of the ancient Sith had warned Krayt about had happened exactly as they said it would. But there was one thing that Bane, Warlock, and everyone else had gotten wrong. Darth Krayt was not finished. Inside that stasis chamber on Korriban, something was happening that should have been impossible. Krayt had learned more from his encounter with Cade Skywalker than anyone had realized. He had watched Cade use dark transfer. He had studied the technique. He had felt its signature in the Force. And now, suspended in a state between existence and oblivion, Krayt turned that knowledge inward. He used dark transfer on himself. He kept a spark of his own life force burning through sheer willpower and through a technique that he had stolen from the last Skywalker. Slowly, over weeks and months inside the chamber, Krayt healed. The damage from the stab wound closed. The lightning burns faded. And something else happened that changed everything. The process of coming back from the edge actually burned away the Yuuzhan Vong implants, the coral growths that had been consuming his body for over a century. The parasite that had defined his appearance and driven his desperation for decades were gone, destroyed, in the process of his own resurrection. The first person to sense what was happening was Darth Talon. She was Krayt's most devoted follower, a Sith Lord who had maintained a silent vigil on Korriban, while Warlock played regent on Coruscant. Talon felt the shift in the Force. She felt her master's presence returning. And when Krayt finally emerged from the stasis chamber, she was there, waiting. The man who walked out was not the same person who had gone in. Krayt was healed, whole. The bony exoskeleton was gone. His body was restored in a way that nobody in the galaxy thought was possible. And the power radiating from him was on a level that dwarfed anything he had shown before. Coming back from the edge had not just healed him, it had transformed him. He confronted Darth Nihil, who had expressed doubts about Krayt during his absence. Krayt dominated him through raw, overwhelming Force power. There was no argument, there was no negotiation. Nihil felt the weight of what was standing in front of him, and he submitted. Then Krayt revealed something that stunned even his own followers. For decades, operating in secret while the rest of the Order focused on the galactic war, Krayt had been collecting the most powerful Force-sensitive newborns from across the galaxy. He had taken them to hidden facilities, enhanced them with cybernetic implants, and molded them into something called Sith Troopers. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were fanatically loyal warriors who were psychically linked to Krayt himself. They would follow any command he gave without hesitation. They would end their own lives at his word. An army inside his army, answering to no one but him. With his power restored and his secret weapon revealed, Krayt did something that sent a shockwave through the Force itself. He projected his will outward across the entire galaxy. Every single being who had ever touched the dark side of the Force felt him in that moment. Every dark sider, every fallen Jedi, every Sith in hiding, every person who had ever opened themselves to that current felt the presence of Darth Krayt, announcing that he had returned. The message reached Cade Skywalker too, wherever he was. The galaxy suddenly knew that the Sith Emperor they thought was recovering in seclusion was something far more dangerous than he had been before. Krayt returned to Coruscant and challenged Warlock directly. The regent who had betrayed his master, who had believed the Dark Lord was gone and that the throne was now his to manage, found himself standing face to face with the man he had tried to put down. The duel between them was decisive. Krayt struck Warlock down and reclaimed the throne of the one Sith without anyone in the Order daring to challenge his right to it. But Krayt had come back different in more ways than just his body. His vision had changed. Having experienced what it felt like to fall and come back, having gone through the process of destruction and renewal in his own flesh, Krayt now believed that the entire galaxy needed to go through the same thing. He called it a rebirth. The galaxy as it existed had to be torn down. What he had experienced personally was now his blueprint for the future of the galaxy itself. The Sith Emperor had returned, and this time conquest was not enough. He wanted to remake everything. Three factions that had spent 7 years fighting Darth Krayt separately finally did the one thing he never wanted them to do. They joined forces. Rowan Fell's Empire in Exile, Admiral Gar Stazi's Galactic Alliance Remnant, the surviving New Jedi Order. The assault began with Cade Skywalker leading a strike team against the Sith Orbital Defense Network. Cade and his team punched through the defenses and disabled enough of the network to create an opening for the Allied fleet. The moment that gap appeared, Stazi and Fell's combined forces jumped into the Coruscant system and caught the Sith Imperial Navy off guard. Warships from 3 different military traditions, Alliance cruisers, and Imperial Star Destroyers, and Jedi starfighters poured into the space around the galactic capital and opened fire on the Sith fleet. On the surface below, Jedi and Imperial Knights launched coordinated ground assaults on key Sith positions across the planet. The Battle of Coruscant became the largest engagement since the Sith Imperial War itself. The skies above the city planet burned with turbo laser fire. Entire districts became combat zones. The fighting was happening on every level, in orbit, in the atmosphere, and on the ground, all at the same time. Krayt had expected this. A man who had spent over a century planning his rise to power was not going to be caught off guard by a frontal assault, no matter how bold it was. He deployed the Dragon ships, a secret fleet that the Resistance had never encountered before, along with his Sith troopers under the command of Darth Nihil. The troopers hit the Allied forces like a wall, but Krayt had one more weapon that made everything else look restrained by comparison: Omega Red, a biotoxin developed by Darth Maladi that was capable of wiping out every living thing on an entire planet. The Sith had been immunized against it. Nobody else had, and Krayt had been manipulating Emperor Roan Fel behind the scenes, feeding him intelligence, pushing him toward a decision that Fel thought was his own. Krayt wanted Fel to deploy Omega Red on Coruscant. If the toxin was released on the capital, every non-Sith being on the planet would be gone. Billions of people eliminated in a single stroke, and the only ones left standing would be Krayt's followers. The galactic capital, cleansed of everyone except the Sith. It would have been the single most devastating act in the history of the galaxy. Roan Fel did not survive the battle. The last emperor of the Fel dynasty fell during the fighting, ending a family line that had ruled the empire for generations. His passing closed a chapter that had begun when his ancestors first reformed the Imperial remnant into something that was supposed to be better than what Palpatine had built. Whether Fel had intended to go through with Omega Red, or whether he would have pulled back at the last moment, is something the galaxy would never know. While the battle raged across every level of Coruscant, Cade Skywalker walked into the Sith Temple. He was not there for the war. He was not there for the Resistance or the Alliance or any political cause. He was there for Krayt. This was personal in a way that went beyond ideology. Cade was the last Skywalker, and this was the moment where that name would either mean something or it would not. Krayt was waiting for him. And the Sith Emperor who met Cade inside that temple was nothing like the man Cade had fought before. The resurrection had changed Krayt on every level. He opened the fight with a display of power that was staggering. Telekinesis that threw Cade across the chamber. Force lightning that crackled through the walls. Dual lightsabers swinging with the speed and precision of a warrior who had been fighting since the Clone Wars and had only gotten stronger with each century. Krayt told Cade that his time beyond the edge of existence had taught him the secret of dark transfer. The same ability that made Cade unique, the healing power that Krayt had been so desperate to harness. Krayt had learned it by watching Cade use it. He had stolen the technique from the Skywalker bloodline itself, and then Krayt proved it. He used dark transfer on Cade, but not to heal him. He used it to take Cade's life. In a single, terrifying application of the power, Krayt stopped Cade Skywalker's heart. The last Skywalker dropped to the floor of the Sith Temple. Gone. Then Krayt brought him back. He reversed the process and pulled Cade out of the darkness, forcing life back into his body the same way Cade had once pulled others back from the edge. And in that space between, In the moment where Cade existed somewhere between gone and alive, Krayt showed him a vision. He showed Cade a future where Coruscant was burning, where everyone Cade had ever cared about was gone, where the galaxy had been torn apart and rebuilt under Sith dominion. And at the center of that vision, the Skywalker bloodline, Cade's own family line, serving the one Sith forever. Generation after generation, bound to the dark side, carrying out Krayt's will across the centuries the same way the Warlock line had served him on Korriban. Krayt was not just trying to defeat Cade. He was trying to break him, to show him that resistance was pointless, that the dark side was going to win regardless of what anyone did, that the smartest thing Cade could do was accept the inevitable and take his place beside the throne. Cade came back to consciousness on the floor of the Sith temple with Krayt standing over him. He had seen the vision. He had felt what it was like to have his life taken and returned by the same hand. He had experienced the full weight of everything Darth Krayt could do, and he looked up at the most powerful Sith Lord the galaxy had seen in over a century, and he said no. He rejected the vision. He rejected the future Krayt had laid out for him. He reached back into the Jedi teachings that he had spent years running from, the heritage that he had tried to bury under bounty hunting jobs and smuggling runs and every distraction the galactic fringe could offer, and he held on to it. The dark side power that Krayt was pouring into him washed over Cade and found nothing to grab onto. Krayt faltered. For one moment, the Sith Emperor's focus shifted, and in that window, Cade struck. A single blow from a Skywalker's lightsaber. The blade found its mark. Darth Krayt went down, but it was not over. Krayt's Force ghost materialized almost immediately, standing over his own fallen body. He taunted Cade. He warned him that coming back from the grave was something he had already done once and could do again. He mentioned transfer essence, a technique he had picked up from the ancient Sith Lords Darth Andedu and Karnes Moore, a power that would allow him to seize control of another body entirely. Krayt's spirit looked at Cade and made it clear that the Skywalker's own body was an option. Cade did not argue with a ghost. He did not stand there debating philosophy or trading threats. He picked up Krayt's body, loaded it onto a ship, flew that ship directly into Coruscant's sun, and let the stellar fire do what no lightsaber, no force power, and no Sith technique could undo. The body of Darth Krayt was incinerated in the heart of a star. There was nothing left to resurrect, nothing left to inhabit, nothing left at all. The man who had been born as Asharad Het in the sand dunes of Tatooine nearly 200 years earlier was finally permanently gone. A boy who lost his father to a bounty hunter. A Padawan who carried darkness before he even understood what it was. A Jedi general who fought through the Clone Wars and kept a secret that helped doom the galaxy. A survivor of Order 66 who lost his identity twice on the same planet. A prisoner of the Yuuzhan Vong who was broken down and rebuilt into something the galaxy had never seen. A Sith Lord who spent 100 years in the dark, building an army one follower at a time, waiting for the perfect moment to step into the light and take everything. His story stretched across more eras of Star Wars history than almost any other character who has ever existed in this universe. From the final decades of the Old Republic to the far future of the Legacy era, from the sands of Tatooine to the tombs of Korriban, to the throne of Coruscant, to the inside of a star. And in the end, it took one more Skywalker to finish what the dark side had started all those years ago in the desert. Cade Skywalker walked out of the Sith Temple and back into a galaxy that was, for the first time in nearly a decade, free of Darth Krayt's shadow. The dragon of the Sith was gone, and the fire that consumed him would burn for billions of years, long after anyone remembered his name.